Colleen. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Ashley?
I'm great. Thanks for joining me. I'm so happy to have you here and to learn from you on this super important topic. Why don't we start with just a little introduction? Tell us about what you do um, what you're passionate about.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I love the Collaborative IEP podcast. And I am two things in one. I started my career as a speech language pathologist a little over 8 years ago in the public schools. And since then, I've worked in different public school districts as well as outpatient clinics, pretty much always with kids. But I have a passion for working with multilingual families. I am a non native Spanish speaker myself, as well as a passion for AAC. And sometimes I can marry those two things together. But a couple years ago, I really got bit by the advocacy bug. It was when I was working in the last outpatient clinic I worked in, and I realized how much those parents really needed support, just understanding the basics of their parent rights and IEP timelines, what they could ask for. And I was like, it'd be really great if I could go to meetings with them. But my schedule just didn't allow for it at the time. But it really started me down the path of thinking of what would that be like if I got to do both. And so fast forward about a year and a half ago is when I started my own local practice. Still just me, but maybe expanding soon. And I do kind of, I would say about 60-70% of my time is spent working with families in their homes, a lot of early intervention, a lot of bilingual service delivery, and the rest of the time spent on advocacy work, attending IEP meetings with families, doing consultative work, as well as working on social media posts to kind of get the word out there more about some of the things I'm passionate about, like translation and interpretation in the IEP process.
That's so great. And so thank you. Thank you for what you do. We are going to talk about, kind of this focus on multilingual families and the idea of transition or translation. But first, I think it's really important to give credit where credit's due. And there aren't many of us that both get the bug and then act on it. So you're out there doing the thing, and providing services to families, and then you are actually going the next step and advocating for them and alongside them. And then not only that, but you're doing the outreach part of it too. And I know because I also listened to the bug and bit it and continue to chew on it. This is getting gross. Um, but I know how hard it is. And so thank you for stepping into this space and for providing that service to families and for staying in it, because it's hard work. So keep at it.
Thank you. I mean, I definitely have folks I look up to, and you being one of them, where I'm sort of in a pinch myself season of life where I'm like, these folks are becoming people I get to talk to and learn more from,
Yeah.
people whose programs and courses I took who I'm now in conversation with and getting to kind of preach the things I'm passionate about. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Do you know Dr. Annie, the
I do.
behavior?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She might be coming on my podcast.
Oh, good, good. Because she's another person that's doing the thing. She still is providing consultative, BCBA services, particularly in schools. And then she does the advocacy work. And then she's got a course that teaches BCBAs how to be advocates. So good. I'm glad you know her. Okay, so we're talking about really supports for multilingual families, and about the challenges they face and then how to support them. So I think that the most obvious, surface level support that we can get families is documents that are in their language. And so let's talk a little bit about rights to interpretation and rights to documents that need to be translated so that parents can meaningfully participate in the IEP process.
Yes, I've kind of treaded into this lightly and have a freebie that kind of goes through what parts of IDEA as well as letters to OCR and the Civil Rights Act talk about this. However, that being said, I splashed all over it and we'll say again here, I am not an attorney advocate. So I'm not using the law in my practice, but I can copy and paste and make it look pretty. And I think that it's important not just for parents, right, to know these rights, but for the staff and the educators on the IEP team to understand that um, translation for what the system calls a limited English proficiency parent, right? A parent with LEP, which is deficit based language, but that's the way the law calls it. It's not optional. They require that in order to be able to meaningfully participate in their child's IEP meeting. And what is tricky about this is it's not always clear, it's not usually clear, especially state to state, how long a school has in order like to get these documents translated. Um, Almost certainly they're not going to give you a draft that's already translated. And so it really does put up barriers to participation early in that process. So not only that, but sometimes the translation I'm receiving for my clients who are not English proficient is incomplete. So what they're doing is they're hitting translate on the software program for the IEP, but nobody's going through the actual present levels and getting those translated. And so that can be a problem because sometimes this back and forth then just elongates the time we're spending on just simply getting the correct information, never mind advocating and collaborating on what's going to be the right plan for the learner.
Right. And meaningful participation is one of the pillars to IDEA. And the reason it is because we've got decades of research that indicates that when parents are meaningfully participating in their child's development and implementation of the IEP, kids get better results. So it's like not that hard of a concept to understand. And foundationally, you have to understand the documents in order to meaningfully participate. Like it almost seems too simple, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure it's one of those bang your head against the wall situations when you face this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I personally invest in a translation software that costs a pretty penny because I can go back and forth with the school team. But eventually, if the decision comes to we need to delay the meeting or, hey, parent, do I have your permission to just translate this document?
Right.
Often that's what I'm doing. I'm doing it for them. And I have to figure out and I'm telling the school team that, right? But I'd rather, be part of the solution and get it moving forward and then need to circle back with that district and talk about like this is not acceptable. Um,
Well,
we
I
have to
think,
get a
yeah.
better process in place.
And I mean, I think that's exactly it. Like, so a skill that my dad taught me when I was very first practicing law was sometimes you got to roll your sleeves up and just do the work. And
Mhm.
so, you can ask, like, I myself was in a car accident. He taught me the skill in personal injury work, like car accident recovery. So I was in a car accident. I had, surprise, surprise, I've got, you know, chronic pain anyway. Like all kinds of like chest slash neck slash back issues, because the backbone's connected to all the bones. And I and they're waiting for my medical and billing records, and I think they requested them, like, 3 months ago, and I just put on my calendar to request them myself because I just gotta roll up my sleeves and get it for them, and then, like, scan them in, put them in a file, give them access to the file in their stupid, encrypted whatever they need, but am I willing to do that to just put this thing to rest? Yeah,
Yep.
nobody else appears to be doing the work. But what's hard, and this is rhetorical, but I'll just say it because I'm certain that you feel it as well, is there are families out there that don't have access to you or
Yep.
to, um, other people and agencies that can help them do that, and so that's the rhetorical part, but the question that comes out of that is, um, are like, isn't it so simple that districts can buy translation software and can probably also use AI to at least get, like, to a decent start?
Yes, it is. And that's not to say that they don't need to have someone, especially with special education knowledge, reviewing those documents. As you talked about Dr. Annie, she was actually just on her story the other day saying, like, some of these things did not like translate or did not highlight the things that we really needed to talk about in the IP. So there
And
is
that
going
was
to
in
have to
English,
be,
by the way.
yeah.
That was in English.
Oh,
Yeah,
there
which
is going to have
I
to
mean,
be a
yeah,
human element
yeah,
to it. I I have a family. I work a lot in early intervention, and so um, I am really trying to prep my families for understanding their rights ahead of becoming a part of the IEP process. Should they qualify at their 3-year-old transition time, and even those intake forms, sometimes families are asking me to help them fill them out for the district in order to initiate that special education referral. And I'm looking at the translation of those and I'm like, "What is in here? Like, what does this say?" So while, like, the bulk of it can be plug and play, I do think you need somebody to go through and look at it. The same can be said, though, for, an interpreter at the meeting. So that's different. Translation documents, interpretation, human beings. I have a meeting coming up for a family who we had a meeting last spring, and that interpreter, bless her heart, she really tried, but she did not know special education. And so as she's interpreting in the meeting, right? She's not a member of the team wearing another hat, at least, thank goodness. That happens too much.
yeah.
Um, I'm kind of also having to like play catch up, and the mom's looking at me like, what's she saying? And I'm kind of retranslating and interpreting. And so it goes both ways.
Yeah.
We need folks who really know special education working on these things.
I'm sure I mean, you know, I don't think I've ever told you this, but I was a German teacher, that's what I taught.
Mhm.
And when I was leaving the classroom, an idea I had was, do I wanna provide interpretation services? But I was like, gosh, I'd have to learn another industry, right? Like, I don't know. I was toying around with a job at a, company that does, like, mechanical parts, and I was like, "I don't even know how
Mm.
to say bolt in German, and now I'm gonna have to learn how to say the blah, blah, blah bolt." Like, it just felt like there was gonna be such a learning curve because you have to know 2 things, like the language and then also the industry. So,
Yeah.
I think that's it's a really nuanced thing, and that's not to say it's easy, but, it's necessary. So let's switch and put the focus on the kids, which we like to do. Um and talk about what bilingual learners need by way of supports. So how do we support students that are on IEPs that are multilingual?
Mm. Well, I would say as first and foremost, the most important thing is the assessment and determining eligibility, looking at is what's going on here, especially in my field in speech pathology, although that underlies so many other aspects of what the testing that goes on. Is there a true disorder, a language disorder, or is this a language difference? Is this Spanish influenced English or Mandarin influenced English that's really more of what we would colloquially call an accent rather than a true language disorder? So it starts with having a proper assessment that is really able to differentially diagnose that. And almost think like that needs to happen first, even before like academic testing goes into place. And then, if that's what is determined to be the case, this child does truly have learning disability, language disorder, cognitive disability. Then we need to think about universal design for learning and using lots of visuals in the classroom. We need to think about who are those support personnel working with them. And if those folks are not proficient in that language, do we have paraprofessionals who could also speak the language of the child and start to bridge that gap? Because sometimes we have issues that escalate as far as like behavior issues where we're talking about a bit or we're looking at an FBA. And sometimes I think it takes that person in the meeting to go, Or did they understand the instruction? You know, did they know what you were asking them to do? Um, we have this thing in the field of speech pathology. I suppose it's outside our field as well. But when we're talking about differential diagnosis, it's called the BICS and the CALP. Have you heard of that before?
Oh, tell me.
Okay, so when we're assessing multilingual learners, we really need to consider what's the difference between their BICS, their basic interpersonal communication skills. Like they're saying, "Good morning, teacher." Yes, and "my name is," and these kind of very rote social phrases that make it look like they know what I'm talking about. Oh yeah,
Right, right.
Jose understands everything I'm saying. That's different from the CALP, which is their cognitive academic language proficiency.
Got it.
And language scientists estimate it takes about 1 to 3 years to achieve the BICS, but it takes 5 to 7, maybe even more for the CALP. And so we sometimes are assuming that kids know, multilingual learners know things in English, especially content, academic content that they're really not grasping until later. So how best to support them is, of course, like really looking at them like an individual. But chances are there's more than one kid in the class who's coming from a home that speaks a language other than English. So yeah, again, I'd go back to universal design for learning, like
Yeah.
repeating directions, putting up visuals, having instructions in multiple formats. It's going to help everybody.
Well, maybe that's why like UDL seems so innate to me. Like I taught in the target language and I like never broke target language. And so I had to do that, right? Because otherwise
Hmm.
nobody had any idea what I was doing. At the end of the day, I was really an actor and I had to teach people what I was saying because they didn't understand what I was saying. So I mean, that like totally makes sense to me. And maybe it's also a good way to describe universal design, right? Like pretend like your students, pretend like nobody understands what's going on. And you've got to be able to address everybody and get everybody to understand what you're saying, um, utilizing other means. So whether we're expressing things or we are taking things in visually or we are experiencing them physically or whatever, like we have to support everything to kind of hit all the different ways that people take in information. I think that's really interesting. The other thing I'm thinking about is that check mark that's in every state's IEP that you have to say, like when you look at eligibility, and you have to say the student qualifies as a student with disability and check their deficits are not a result of a language thing. So like that's what you're assessing. And I have to be perfectly honest, it's only come up in my practice, I'm going to say 1.5 times where we've had to like actually stop and think about that. And then kind of as a team, we've all been like, yeah, no, it's not that. Um, so how do you assess that? Like if that is an issue, how do you
Hmm.
assess that?
Yeah. Well, I will say that I think every speech language pathologist needs to understand how to do bilingual dynamic assessment. It can't just be those of us that speak a language other than English because there simply are not enough of us to service all of the multilingual learners in the country. So while for me, like in my grad program, this was an optional course credit that I took, bilingual assessment. I really think it needs to be required for
Yeah.
everyone. Um, because two things, like you can be linguistically competent, but that doesn't always mean you're culturally responsive. And then you need to really have both things and additional training to know how to do that. I've had clinical fellows who speak Spanish natively, but they never got the training in bilingual assessment. And so I've had to teach that. So how you would do it is you're going to have to go through each kind of section that we assess in schools, right? Receptive language, expressive language, articulation and phonology, voice, fluency, pragmatics. And every time you need to look at what's going on in both of these languages. And there needs to be deficits across both languages for it to be a true disorder. So, one
Yeah.
really gold standard test for this It's only available for kids 4 to 7 right now. It's called the BESA. Um, and that one goes through almost all of those domains I just talked about and was actually normed on bilingual children in the
Yeah.
United States, which is important because there are other tests that are normed only on monolingual Spanish speakers. So almost every time, I'll give an example, the Self 4 Spanish, almost every time I gave the Self 4 Spanish, they'd qualify because a bilingual learner is not going to have the same knowledge base as a monolingual Spanish speaker.
Right.
So they would not perform well. So it's really
That's
important we get
crazy.
those bilingual tests.
Yeah, because they speak 2 languages, they don't do as well on the test for Spanish speakers, but it's because they speak 2 languages, and so they don't know as much
We're not capturing their knowledge in both. Yeah. So there's other tests like the expressive vocabulary test that's bilingual. They get credit whether they say it in English or Spanish when they're naming the
Right,
picture.
right,
So we
right.
need to make sure those tests are right, have their good psychometric values, are culturally responsive, have the right normative data. And sometimes that's like the easiest first thing I look at, right? Is like, what were those tests? What tests did we select? And is that going to give us the right picture for the child?
That takes me back to this situation years and years ago where, a student was okay, so the parents were from different countries that spoke different languages, so there were 2 native languages on the parents. And then together, they spoke a 3rd language at home that was like a dialect of the mom's, like, native language. And the dad spoke that as a 2nd or 3rd language, as an additional language. And then the kid spoke English at home and would have said their primary language was English. On the school intake form, they had to say what language is spoken at home, and
Hmm.
so the parents were like, "Well, we speak only in this dialect of mom's native language." And so they wrote that in. And so the child then got put into the test to see if he needed to go to ELL at school. And the test for ELL was like according to the parents would have described it as like impossible to test out of. And so the kid was getting pullout services and the parents were like, he doesn't need pullout services. We don't want him in pullout services. He needs to be in gen ed because he's going to be an engineer someday and blah blah blah. And I mean, I was kind of the mentality of like, this was again years and years ago, and this is how you grow. But I was kind of the mentality of like, oh, 20 minutes of pull out twice a week isn't gonna like wreck a kid. And I still maintain that because it's not gonna wreck a kid. But like what you just said reminds me of that because now, of course, I'm like, well, wait, that was probably only testing monolingual speakers in that particular thing and not the bilingualism. Never mind, like the quadrilingualism of this kid. No wonder nobody could pass the test.
Well, and those state proficiency exams, that's a whole nother thing. And those aren't and necessarily like, you're not going to get a standard score. Those aren't normative. Those are
Sure.
just,
Yeah.
did you hit the benchmark?
Yep.
I definitely know I've known families who will purposely say they're not speaking another language at home because they don't want their kid having to go through the test and they don't want those ELL services. They don't want them pulled out or singled out. And so they'll not check that box. And
Yeah.
then they may come up for special education
Right.
evaluation.
That's what I wanted.
And I'm going, and we as speech pathologists do a full case history, like what
Yeah.
language, not just of what mom and dad spoke, but like, did your child go to daycare? What did they speak there?
Yeah.
Did they spend time with grandma? What did she speak to them? Full history. And yeah,
Yeah.
with those tests. But I will say this with those like multilingual ones, because I focus on standardized testing. There's some good standardized tests, but more often than not, we're going to have to do dynamic assessment. We're going to have to do language sampling and really get into like, okay, what grammatical elements are they using? Are they appropriate for their age? What basic concepts, like opposite concepts, do they know? Are they appropriate for their age? And you're not always going to get a standard score, and that's where the
Yeah.
clinical expertise comes in.
Well, this has gotten way nerdier than I expected it, and I am like totally here for it. I love it. that's what this guy that the client was like, we never should have checked the box. Let's go back and amend the educational record. And it's nearly impossible to amend
Hmm.
records. And so, um, yeah, I mean, that's a really, really fascinating thing. And I've had very similar cases, right? Like, I mean, I can protect the identity of that client immensely. I'm sitting here thinking, am I breaching confidentiality? But I've had a lot of very similar cases where that happens. Um, and the like don't check the box idea comes up a lot. So it's interesting. And that is not legal advice nor other advice from either of us. It's just a really interesting concept that I think kind of runs like very parallel to this discussion, and is worth mentioning. So yeah, I mean, this is like a really, really important topic. And
It's so important.
yeah, I mean, I'm really happy that you're doing this work. Are there, this is kind of like a follow-up question, because if somebody can't find Colleen or an advocate that does what Colleen does in their area, are there organizations that can point people in the right direction on these kind of like comprehensive multilingual services? Do you know of
You
any?
know, so yes, I would say like so many things, it's probably state to state and like almost county to county, very like local. Um, However, let me get back to you on that so you can like link it in the show notes because um there certainly are like websites where you can get this kind of good information, but it is very hard to find. And in terms of finding like a bilingual advocate, yeah, it's very challenging. I would say like that's a big barrier for these families, not just maybe finding someone who speaks their language, but even somebody who maybe doesn't speak their language but still like understands. These are the kinds of things we need to be looking for. I'm all about like just trying to encourage other parents, teachers, SLPs, whoever it may be, who are already bilingual, like to learn about advocacy. And I'm pointing them in the direction of like, go take this course, go take the lab and the ABC course. Like take these courses and you too, even if you only help 3 people a year, like you can do this as well. I guess that's a little bit where my advocacy is coming from right now to help these families is to like almost recruit more bilingual advocates because even if they can like find their rights and figure these things out like on a website, like the layers of this navigation are already so hard for families who speak English and went through the US education system themselves. I have a lot of families I work with in early intervention who did not go through the US education system. So that's even like brand new to them.
It's like
So
Mars.
showing them a website like with that stuff, it's it might give them the knowledge, but I don't know if it gives them the confidence to like act on it. Know
So
what to
important.
say. Know
So
what to
important.
say.
So if we don't get that, if it doesn't sound like there's like you're not gonna find
I
and
can't think of anything off the top of my head that's like amazing.
but I think, I mean, what I would say is in your state, it there are going to be parent advocacy um places. So a lot of states have a UCED, a University Center of Excellence for Developmental Disabilities, or a SPIN network, and I don't know what that stands for, SPIN, like you're spinning something.
Mhm.
There's protection and advocacy. There are your local disability organizations
Yep.
that talk to your
Like Disability Rights California would be great.
disability rights organizations, and even if your kid doesn't have autism or CP or Down syndrome, call those organizations and say, hey, do you know of somebody that provides this service or whatever? Because we're all one
Yep.
human family, and we can help one another. And so, I think even if it is very localized, which I realize I was putting you on the spot, Colleen, but you answered the answer that I like the
It's
best. I don't know, but I'm gonna look it up.
well, and
Like,
because
so
I can think
helpful.
of one that's like super local to me and something that is
Yes.
really, really cool is my local school district, a parent started a special education PTA. And I've
Yeah.
never heard of that, like
Mhm.
any school district doing that before.
Yeah.
But
They're really
sh
common on the East Coast.
she is doing everything in English and Spanish, and I think she speaks both herself. So, like, all my local people, like, I know exactly where to refer them to, right? And she's doing free, like, informational sessions and things,
Oh,
but, that's super it's hyper local as, like, a
yeah.
lot of things are, but like you said, Autism Society, like, around me, I know has a bilingual at least, like, I think a bilingual support group. So as we were talking about before we hit record, like, parent support groups are so important. And even if you can't find an advocate right away, you might find a friend at that support group who can help you, like, take the next
Somebody
step.
else that's been there. That's so, so important. Colleen, remind everybody where they can find you to get more information.
Sure. So I am at theadvocate.slp on Instagram, soon to be at theadvocateslp.com as well. I have a podcast called Unfiltered IEPs, which you can find on Apple and YouTube. And season 2 will be launching in 2026 with some new guests. I try to interview people who sit in all different seats at the IEP table so we can understand different perspectives better.
So good. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been really, really fun.
Thank you.